which is botany. So, you know, even the insect knows that the link between the sciences is very important. They are now developing machines on a tiny, tiny, tiniest of scales. This one here, this is an ant. If you can imagine the size of an ant, just think about how small an ant is and whether you've ever even seen an ant's mandibles. Well, this guy, he's carrying a computer in his mandibles. This is astonishing stuff. This photograph was taken at Huddersfield University in England. That computer is far more powerful as a device than anything that you've ever used. And that picture was taken 3 years ago. They are now 100 times more powerful and 10 times smaller than that. To put these into perspective, when Cornell announced their latest one some months ago, this was the scenario that was given to us, just to put their power into perspective. In 1993, 10 years ago, Intel's most powerful microprocessor had 3.1 million transistors on a single chip. Today, their equivalent best has 40 million transistors on a chip. So in 10 years, they've moved from 3 million to 40 million. These things, these kind of devices, multiply that by 100, even now, to an astonishing 4,000 million transistors on a single silicon chip. And it is all so small that they do this on something 1,000,000 times thinner than a human hair. It's that small. Computers that you can bunch up and fit within the full stop at the end of a sentence. The amazing thing about these monatomic elements is that they're not actually a new discovery. We seem to have caught up with them again, but we seem to know about them a long, long time ago. We can go back to some very ancient texts. We can go back to Egypt. We can go back to Mesopotamia. We can go back even to the Bible itself and find lots and lots of ancient references to magical powders which actually seem to do all of the things that scientists are now telling us that these are capable of. It called these powders, which were associated gold in Mesopotamia, they were called shamana. In Egypt, they were called mufkut. So they had all these strange names. The Alexandrians called it the paradise stone. It's not a stone, it's a powder, but they called it the paradise stone. And in all cases, whether it was shamana, mufkut, paradise stone, or whatever, they all said this is a mysterious powder of projection. A powder of projection. And the various cultures were unanimous on that particular description. They said it has powers of levitation, powers of transmutation, of teleportation. It seemed to be a vehicle by which they would communicate with gods. It was something to do with the afterlife of the Egyptian pharaohs. And they also said it was a key to active longevity. Because of this, people were able to live a long time, particularly those whose life it was part of, the high priests, the kings, the pharaohs. The Egyptian pyramid texts, they talk about the material. It's called mufkut. The pyramid texts come from the 5th dynasty tomb at Saqqara of King Unas. Here is described something called the field of mufkuts. And this is interesting because this moves into modern science again, the field of mufkuts. This material was meant to have a field around it or about it, or that it was associated with, that was very magical and very powerful, and was the field in which the pharaohs would communicate with the gods. It was the field that determined their final gateway to the afterlife. The stories of this field turn up earlier than the 5th dynasty. They turn up in the 4th dynasty. They turn up in the 3rd and the 2nd. And it's very interesting that we've never discovered the bodies of any of those old kingdom pharaohs. We've discovered what we think might be their tombs, but we've never discovered their bodies or their mummies. Those that we've got are from a much later time. Somehow or other, they seem to have vanished into thin air. And the texts tell us they were sent into the field of mufkuts. Intriguing. This is a portion of an old Egyptian temple. There's an interesting story behind this temple. The anniversary of its discovery, the 100th anniversary, is next year. It was discovered in 1904, but it was not discovered in Egypt. Back in 1904, the Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, British archaeologist, went on an expedition into the land of Sinai to map the country for the Egypt Exploration Fund. And that was the land apparently where Moses had taken the Israelites and they'd crossed this land of Sinai to get from Egypt into the Promised Land. And en route there they'd stopped at this amazing mountain. And this was the mountain where Moses saw the burning bush. It was where he received the Ten Commandments and the Book of the Law. It was where he seemingly spoke with God and where they built the Ark of the Covenant. And this whole story is full of accounts of fires and all sorts of amazing magical things going on. Anyway, they decided to climb this mountain. They climbed it. 2,500 feet above ground level, they found a great plateau with this temple. An Egyptian temple in the middle of nowhere. 270 feet of it on this plateau. Another equal amount of it back inside a cave that was carved into the mountain. This thing was very important. At the time, they didn't know what they were looking for. They didn't know what they'd found, but they found a secreted hoard of pure, unadulterated white powder, which they said they winnowed and they sieved and they tested. There was nothing there, no residue of anything, just this amazing powder, which he said would disappear into your fingerprints. It was so fine. It seemed to have been an operative workshop, he said, more of a place of work than worship. The whole thing was dedicated, it seems, to mufkut and the production of mufkut. Every pharaoh from the 4th dynasty to the 19th dynasty was portrayed there. Every pharaoh had stated things that were written on tablets in this mountain. So these wall reliefs depict, going through the pharaohs of numerous dynasties, strange presentations. This is an example of one. This is drawn up by the Egypt Exploration Fund, this particular one from a relief. This is Pharaoh Amenhotep III. This is an 18th dynasty pharaoh. And the caption, and these are all captioned in hieroglyphs, it says, Shebek Hotep brings the noble and precious stone to his majesty. He is the guardian who brings the bread, because he is the great one over the house of gold. So we have this, and we have this fellow here called Shebek Hotep, a treasurer fellow who's holding in the middle of the picture this cone-shaped object. So the association is there, and there are numerous of these. And once that had been discovered in this Sinai temple, the moment Egyptologists went back into Egypt and began to look, they kept finding these. Mufkut, cones, bread, light. It was about bread. It was about something the kings ingested. They were eating this material that was formed into little cakes, but it was a powder. The Old Testament book of Exodus gives us a really good example of this in operation. It took the longest time before anybody even thought to ask a question about this little bit of the story in Exodus. Many of you will know the story. Moses had been up the mountain. He'd come down with the Ten Commandments, and then he broke the tablets because he got terribly angry to see that his brother Aaron had collected all the gold earrings from the Israelites and melted them down and made a golden calf as an idol of worship. And he said, well, that may be the way we used to do things. We don't do that anymore. We have this new culture here that we're part of, and I've just spoken to the Lord of this culture, and we don't worship graven images anymore. And he got very angry. And then it says this, that he took the golden calf, he burnt it with fire, he transposed it with powder, mixed that with water, and fed it to the Israelites. Interesting little story. He took